Well, the introduction to this sermon is brought to you by my favourite Christian parody news site, the Babylon Bee, fake news you can trust. Families hoping for financial relief for the holiday season received troubling news 2 weeks ago as US President Donald Trump announced he was imposing 25% tariffs on all incoming Christmas presents from the North Pole. Inside sources said the move came after an impasse in contentious negotiations between representatives of the Trump administration and the Santa Claus regime, with the sides unable to reach a trade agreement. Trump broke off talks and hit Santa's North Pole enterprises with heavy import tariffs. "We've been taken advantage of far too long," Trump told reporters in the Oval Office. "This Santa thinks he's a tough guy, but he's not going to be cheating the US anymore. Starting immediately, there will be 25% tariffs on all toys and other presents being shipped into our country from the North Pole. We only want what's fair. If Santa wants to make a deal with us, he knows how to get a hold of us. I've been sending him letters from the White House every year. I've been here." Now, I really enjoy the Babylon Bee. It's obviously fake news, but it does sound kind of believable, doesn't it? I mean, that's the beauty of satire, isn't it? It's fake, but it sounds believable because there is real news. The real news is that earlier this year, President Trump did announce tariffs, that he would be taxing countries around the world for sending goods into America. And there were very strong reactions to that, weren't there? Very strong reactions, fear and panic being some of the greatest ones among them. And I wanted to mention this fake news that leads to real news to make a simple point. Big claims generate reactions, don't they? Big claims generate reactions. So, for example, earlier this year, the Australian government announced that social media is harmful for people who are under 16. And not only did they announce that, they announced their intentions to have a social media ban on anyone under the age of 16. And there were all kinds of reactions to that, some of them very positive, some of them very negative. Strong reactions to those big claims. Or here's a recent one, and I think a recent very sad one, is Anthony Albanese claiming that we don't need a royal commission into what happened at Bondi the other week. That's a very strong claim. And in my view, it's rightly generated strong reactions to that claim. But a much more radical claim than any of these is the claim that Jesus is Lord. Is the claim that Jesus is God's chosen king. That Jesus is the king destined to save his people and rule the world. That claim has had a much bigger impact on the world and this country than any of the other claims I've just mentioned. And by the time we get to the story of the however, I don't know if there was three, however many wise men there were, by the time we get to the story of the wise men, Matthew, the writer of this book of the Bible, the book Matthew, has already called Jesus the Christ 4 times in chapter 1. The Christ or the Messiah. The Christ or Messiah means God's anointed one, God's chosen king, God's chosen ruler, God's chosen saviour. To call someone that is a big claim. And Matthew makes that claim again and again and again. And if it's not true that Jesus is God's chosen king, then at best it's a joke and at worst a monstrous lie. But if it's true, then Jesus really offers the hope that our hope-starved world desperately needs and has a rightful authority over the people of this world. It's a radical claim, and people have all kinds of responses to it. Let's have a look in Matthew chapter 2, in this story of the Magi, at 3 different responses to the claim that Jesus is the newborn king and what is said about the significance of him coming into the world. And as we do that, each of us is invited to consider our own response to Jesus. What do you make of this baby who grew up to be a man who died and rose again? What do you make of this baby who some claim is God's anointed one? Well, here's one reaction, the reaction of King Herod. King Herod has a very strong reaction to Jesus, doesn't he? Now, King Herod was the king of the Jewish people at the time when Jesus is born, but he's not king by right of birth. Herod wasn't even Jewish. He was an Idumean, Now, if you don't know who the Idumeans are, they're actually descended from Esau, from the Edomites. And so if you think there are tensions between Australians and New Zealanders, for example, that is nothing. The tension between, it's more like a Russian and a Ukrainian. This is the kind of tension between the Idumeans and the Israelites. And this guy, Herod, has been made king, and he's been made king through dodgy deals with the Romans. So the Romans have the power over Israel. They've made this guy their puppet king. And Herod, not only was he a puppet king, he was mentally unstable, deeply insecure, and prone to fits of rage. So in Matthew chapter 2, we read the opening words where the Magi from the east come to Jerusalem, and verse 2 ask, "Where is the one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." Herod is disturbed, and all Israel with him. Herod is disturbed to hear about someone born King of the Jews, because Herod has not been born King of the Jews. But there's a claim that there is a legitimate king who's been born, which Herod doesn't have. Now, you think Herod's going to like this? No way. He's not going to worship this king. He's not going to hand his kingdom over to some baby. And not only is Herod disturbed, all Jerusalem is as well. And that makes sense, because if a new king has been born and the current puppet king is mentally unstable and violent, who wants to be a subject in that kingdom when your mentally unstable king feels threatened? And as the story goes on, we learn that he tries to trick the Magi. "Tell me where he is so I can worship him with you." Of course, he wants to kill Jesus. And when he fails to trick the Magi, he becomes incredibly violent, even killing infants to secure his own power. That's a terrifying thought, isn't it? It's a terrifying thought that a person could be so committed to their own lifestyle, their own comfort, their own power, that they would kill infants to maintain it. It's horrifying, isn't it? That is how wicked Herod is. What about us? What about today? Because as we look around the world, the angry, disturbed response to Jesus has been pretty common throughout history. I read just this morning on the Other Cheek Christian news page that on Christmas Day there were some Indonesian Christians who went to church, and there was a row of Muslims just forming a line. "You will not worship Jesus in this building." And the police were just standing there watching on, doing nothing. Muslims hate Christians worshipping Jesus. They are angry. In China, you probably know that China is a very hard... Just everyone take a few deep breaths. You may know that in China there is very significant oppression of Christians. I read an article on Open Doors yesterday. In a sweeping operation that began about 2 months ago, Chinese authorities deployed 300 to 400 police officers in 200 vehicles to target Christians linked to house churches across different areas in East China. One of Open Doors' local partners remarks, "We haven't seen such a massive force used to address church-related matters like this before." Jason, another local partner, shares, "Due to the recent crackdowns, our church ministry has come to a standstill. Some brothers and sisters have left the church, while several others are on the verge of losing their faith. The number of full-time ministry workers has dropped from 6 to just 1, as the rest have stepped down from their position and are seeking employment elsewhere. More than 80 small fellowship groups with the house churches have ceased meeting. Of the original 14 churches, only a few remain." That's the pressure that's just a little bit of the pressure that Chinese Christians are facing. Please be praying for Chinese Christians. And please be thankful for the privileges that we have. We've never had the government try and shut our small groups down or arrest me for being a pastor. Maybe it'll happen one day, but thank God it hasn't yet. Pray for them. Or think of the Fulani Muslims in northern Nigeria who are aggressively kidnapping and murdering Christians in such a brutal way that the world is finally noticing. Chinese communists, Fulani Muslims, they don't want any competition for the rule of Nigeria or China. Because Jesus makes a claim to be a ruler, they hate him. But it's not just in China or northern Nigeria or Indonesia that people are disturbed by Jesus. Many have felt disturbed by Jesus throughout history and all over the world because Jesus is not, he's not like the King of England who has virtually no impact on what happens in Australia at all. He still has an impact in England, of course, but Jesus is a king who is intimately involved with the details of his people's lives every day. Jesus wants a say, in fact, not just a say, the ultimate say in how we treat other people, in who we sleep with, in how we use our money. And many people find that disturbing. I don't want Jesus to tell me how to spend my money. I don't want Jesus to tell me who I can have a relationship with or not and how to do it. I don't want Jesus to have any say in how I spend my time. But that's the kind of king he is. And many people don't want to be ruled by King Jesus, so they are disturbed. I want to ask you, is that you? Does Jesus disturb you? Does his desire to rule you anger you? I find it sad that so many people are disturbed by Jesus because you can't find a better king than him. No king cares better for his people than he does. None of us like to be ruled. None of us like to be told what to do, but some rulers, some leaders are a blessing to follow. That's the kind of leader Jesus is. Isaiah describes him as wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Jesus is the best ruler you can have. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Wise men still seek him. Here's another way you can respond to Jesus from this passage. The religious leaders. When the Magi come asking Herod where they can find the one born king of the Jews, Herod doesn't have a clue. So he goes to the Jewish religious leaders and he asks them. And they open up the Bible and answer. So verse 4, when he'd called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. And they said, in Bethlehem in Judea. For this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, this is quoting Micah chapter 5, in the land of Judah are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Now notice two things about these religious leaders. Number one, they knew about God's promised king. These guys are clued in. They even know which passage of the Old Testament prophesies where he'll be born. But here's the other thing to notice, they didn't care. They didn't go to see the newborn king. In fact, we don't know exactly when the wise men showed up. I know they appear in nativity scenes, but it's more likely that Jesus was between 1 and 2 years old when the wise men show up on the scene. And so these religious leaders have not been to see Jesus in that time, and they still don't show any information. Furthermore, they are so disinterested in Jesus that they don't think twice about telling brutal King Herod where he can find this king to kill him. Which is just astonishing, isn't it? These were the Jewish religious leaders. They should have been buying front row seats. They should have been first in line to see and worship this king. But they're apathetic. They don't even care if Herod kills him. And we're not told why, but it's so sad, isn't it? It's tragic that the chief priests and so on respond in this way. What about today? Lots of people today know about Jesus but are apathetic, aren't they? There's so many people who know lots of facts about Jesus. They might have spent years and years going to Sunday school or school scripture. They know so much, but I've got other things to do. I've got more important things to occupy me, which is so sad, isn't it? Because we have every reason to care about Jesus. He's brought so much good. I mean, it's Just a very small example. You heard of the Flying Doctors, World Vision, the Salvation Army, the Red Cross. All of these were started by followers of Jesus. They wouldn't exist if not for Jesus. Priya shared with me about Sri Lanka, her home country. The missionaries brought medicine, they brought education, and they brought Jesus to Sri Lanka. Jesus has brought tremendous good all over the world. But much more significantly than any of these other things, chapter 1, verse 21 says, he'll be called Jesus because he will save people from their sins. And for those who know Jesus here in Australia or in Sri Lanka or anywhere in the world, the forgiveness of sins and peace with God is the most precious gift you can be given, and that is what Jesus offers. So let's see today that Jesus has done so much good, is doing so much good, will do so much good. He's worth caring about, ultimately because there's forgiveness in him and no one else. Wise men and women still seek him, which leads us to the final response, which is the response of the wise men themselves. Now, the wise men, we sometimes call them kings. They may have been, but there's no evidence in the Bible that they were kings. Sometimes we say there's 3 of them. There may have been, but there may have been 17 of them. We just don't know how many there were. And the original Greek word about them is that they were magi. So they're quite likely astrologers, maybe from Persia, maybe from Arabia. Either way, they are the least likely people in the world that you would expect to see come and worship Jesus. It's stunning that they've come. But they come and they speak to Herod, and we read in verse 9, they go on their way and the star they'd seen rose, went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. Coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. And then they opened their treasures and presented with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The last people you would have imagined to respond to Jesus like this are Middle Eastern astrologers, but they worship the king. Now, the Jewish religious leaders didn't get this, but foreign astrologers did. One of the things I love most about Jesus is how he turns the world upside down. Those you'd most expect to respond well to him don't, and those you'd least expect to respond to him do. Now, it wasn't just the wise men who worshipped Jesus, though. No, years and years later, Jesus' disciples were in a boat, and they were terrified that they were going to drown. Jesus was in the back snoring. They wake him up. "We're going to drown, don't you care?" Jesus just speaks a word, "Be still." And the storm stops. And he says to his disciples, "You have little faith, why did you doubt?" And as the disciples speak to one another, they say, "Surely this is the Son of God." They are drawn to worship. Or there's a story in John's Gospel of a man born blind, and this man's born blind, and Jesus makes mud and puts it on his eyes and tells him to go and wash, and the man comes to see. It's John chapter 9, read it. It's such a wonderful part of the Bible. And this blind man, over the course of this story, more and more pressure is put on him to say that Jesus is a sinner. But the more pressure is put on him and the more he realises who Jesus really is. Until at the very end of John chapter 9, he worships Jesus. It's an absolutely appropriate response. Well, there are some of Jesus' followers, the women who went to the tomb on the morning a couple of days after his death. They find the tomb empty, but shortly later, Jesus, the once dead but now living again Jesus, appears to them. And what did the women do? They fall down and worship him. Because again and again, he is revealed to be not just a man, he is God in the flesh to be worshipped. And throughout history, so many people have come to the conviction that Jesus really is God in the flesh, and have given themselves to worship him, to praise him, to serve him, to love him as the one who brings hope, love and peace beyond imagining. How about you? Are you a worshipper of Jesus Christ? Is there anyone or anything in the universe more worthy of your awe, your adoration, your devotion than Jesus? You might be the last person in the world who your friends would expect to see come out as a worshipper of Jesus. But it happened for the wise men. It happened for his disciples. It happened for those women at the tomb. Could it happen for you as well? There's something going on in the world at the moment which has been called the quiet revival. Anyone heard of this, the quiet revival? A couple of hands, a couple of nods. Basically, for a long time in the Western world, like Europe, England, America and Australia, there was this real hardness to the gospel. There was a lot of hard work in evangelism and just didn't seem there was much response to it. But over the last 18 months or so, there's been a real upsurge in England, in America and in Australia, particularly of young men just showing up at church, wanting to know about Jesus. There's been an upsurge in people showing interest online in engaging with Christianity. It seems that quietly God's Spirit is at work at the moment, raising interest. I find that really encouraging. Maybe you've been praying for a friend for years, and maybe now is a good moment for you to say, hey, can we talk more about this? Would you like to come to church with me? Would you like to read a gospel with me? Or maybe it's a good time for you to get trained in how you could share your faith with someone else. If you'd like to do that, have a chat to me. Maybe I can help you with that. Or there's a number of women who've been working together on Friday mornings, helping equip each other to do that. You might want to connect with them as well. I can let you know who they are. It seems that God is doing something at the moment, something to be excited about, praying about. And there's so many things that we don't know about the wise men. We don't know how many of them there were. We don't know where they were from. We don't know how long their journey took. We don't know whether they were kings or not. We don't even know exactly how old Jesus was when they visited him. But there is something we know. We know that they responded rightly to God revealing himself to them. We know they responded rightly to Jesus. They worshipped him. And in doing that, they are very wise. Wise men and women still seek and worship Jesus today. How about you?